At Everleigh Manor, house servant Naomi Parker must keep her extraordinary singing voice hidden. Mrs. Everleigh has made it clear the help should be seen and not heard. When Julian, the wealthy heir of the estate, accidentally overhears Naomi's forbidden song one night, he's moved to tears in front of high society guests. His emotional reaction sets in motion a journey that will challenge social boundaries and family expectations. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Everleigh Manor, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Naomi Parker wiped sweat from her brow as she scrubbed the kitchen tiles. At 24, she had spent most of her life working in this grand house, where the wealthy Everleigh family lived in luxury, while she and the other house staff worked from dawn till dusk. "Naomi, Mrs. Everleigh wants fresh flowers in the dining room before lunch," said Martha, the head housekeeper, her voice stern. "Yes, ma'am," Naomi replied quietly, rising to her feet. She never spoke above a whisper these days. As she walked to the garden, Naomi thought about the life she'd been born into. The Everleighs owned everything for miles around: the land, the businesses, and in many ways the people who worked for them. Her parents had worked at the manor before her, and now she continued the tradition, trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. Outside, the garden bloomed with roses of every color. Naomi breathed in their sweet scent as she carefully cut the finest blooms for Mrs. Everleigh's arrangement. This was one of the few moments in her day where she felt a hint of peace. Without thinking, she began to hum softly. The melody was simple, something her mother used to sing when Naomi was a child. The sound barely carried Auntie breeze. "What is that noise?" Naomi froze. Mrs. Everleigh stood on the garden path, her face twisted with displeasure. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't realize—" "You know the rules of this house," Mrs. Everleigh snapped. "The help is to be seen, not heard, especially you." Naomi lowered her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." "Your mother never learned either. That voice of yours." Mrs. Everleigh's eyes narrowed. "It's inappropriate, distracting. If I hear it again, you'll be looking for new employment. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mrs. Everleigh," Naomi whispered, her cheeks burning with shame. That night, alone in her tiny room in the servants' quarters, Naomi cried silently into her pillow. The warning had stirred painful memories. Years ago, when she was just 16, Mrs. Everleigh had caught her singing while folding laundry. The punishment had been severe. A week without pay and a night spent locked in the cold cellar. And Naomi had been careful, but music lived inside her as natural as breathing. When no one was around, late at night in the laundry room or behind the rose hedge in the moonlight, she would let her voice free, if only for a few precious minutes. What Naomi didn't know was that someone had been listening. Julian Everleigh stood at the window of his bedroom, watching the rain fall over the family estate. At 26, he was the sole heir to the Everleigh fortune, a burden that felt heavier with each passing day. "Julian, are you dressed? The guests will be arriving soon." His mother's voice came through the door, impatient as always. "Almost ready, Mother," he called back, adjusting his tie. Another party. Another evening of mindless chatter with people who only cared about his family name and money. Julian sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Lately, he'd been feeling empty inside. The life that had been unplanned for him since birth, taking over the family business, marrying someone from the right social circle, maintaining the Everleigh legacy. All of it felt hollow. The only thing that had brought him any peace recently was the voice he'd heard one night 3 months ago. He had been unable to sleep and had gone for a walk around the grounds. That's when he heard it, a voice so pure, so full of emotion, that it stopped him in his tracks. It was coming from behind the rose hedge. Quietly, he had moved closer. There stood Naomi, the young woman who worked in the house. Her eyes were closed, her face turned up to the night sky as she sang. Julian had been transfixed. The song was unfamiliar to him, but the raw emotion in her voice made his heart ache. Since that night, he had found himself seeking out that voice. Sometimes he would hear her in the laundry room late at night. Other times, when he couldn't sleep, he would walk the grounds hoping to catch the sound of her singing. He never let her know he was there. Julian understood that this was her private moment, her secret rebellion against the strict rules of the household. But her voice had become his lifeline, the only genuine thing in his world of privilege and pretense. "Julian, come meet Senator Wilson's daughter," Mrs. Everly said, guiding her son through the crowded drawing room. The manor was filled with the upper crust of society, all dressed in their finest for the Everlys' annual summer gathering. "Catherine is studying art history at Yale," Mrs. Everly continued, presenting a slim, blonde woman who smiled at Julian with practiced charm. "How interesting," Julian said automatically, though his mind was elsewhere. For the next hour, he played his part, making small talk, laughing at the right moments, being the perfect host. But inside, he felt like he was suffocating. In the kitchen, Naomi and the other staff rushed to keep up with the demands of the party. Trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres needed constant replenishing. "Naomi, take these shawls to the side parlor," Martha instructed. Some of the ladies were complaining about the evening chill. Naomi nodded and gathered the delicate cashmere shawls. She moved quietly through the servants' corridors to avoid the guests, emerging near the side parlor where a few shawls had been left earlier. The night was beautiful, with stars twinkling above. Through the open windows, she could hear the murmur of conversation and forced laughter from the main drawing room. As she arranged the shawls, a melody rose to her lips. Before she could stop herself, she was singing softly. It was a song her grandmother had taught her, about freedom and longing. Naomi didn't realize that the side parlor connected to the drawing room by open double doors. She didn't know that her voice was carrying inside. In the drawing room, Julian was trapped in a dull conversation with a business associate of his father. So when he heard it, that voice, her voice. The conversation around him faded away as Naomi's song filled his ears. It was stronger than he'd ever heard it before, though still gentle. The melody wrapped around his heart like a caress. One by one, the guests fell silent. Eads turned toward the sound. Julian stood frozen by the fireplace, a glass of champagne in his hand. The raw emotion in Naomi's voice hit him like a physical blow. It was sorrow and hope, pain and resilience all at once. And suddenly, to his horror and amazement, he felt tears well up in his eyes. He tried to blink them away, but it was too late. The tears spilled down his cheeks, and a small sob escaped his throat. The room went completely silent now. Everyone stared at Julian Everly, the composed, controlled heir, crying openly in front of the most influential people in the county. His mother's face drained of color. "Julian!" she hissed, moving toward him. But Julian couldn't stop. Every word Naomi sang seemed to strip away another layer of the walls he'd built around himself. In her voice, he heard the truth he'd been avoiding, that his family's wealth came at the cost of others' suffering, that the fort he'd known all his life was built on the backs of people like Naomi, that he had been complicit in a system that treated human beings as property. When the last note faded, Julian set down his glass with a shaking hand. Without a word to the stunned guests, he turned and walked quickly toward the hallway, toward her. He found Naomi in the side corridor, her face pale with fear, tears already forming in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for anyone to hear." Julian crossed the space between them and took her hands in his. They were rough from years of hard work, so different from his own. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice breaking. "That was the most honest thing this house has ever heard." Naomi tried to pull away, glancing fearfully toward the drawing room. "You're crying in front of them because of me. They'll say—" "I don't care what they say," Julian interrupted, his eyes never leaving hers. "I care that you sang, and something in me finally woke up." For a moment, they stood there, hands joined, eyes locked. Then the sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. "You should go," Julian whispered. "Meet me in the study at midnight." Naomi hesitated, then nodded quickly before slipping away down the servants' corridor. Julian turned to face his mother, who was advancing toward him with fury in her eyes. "Hat is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone." "No, Mother," Julian said, his voice steady despite the tears still drying on his face. "For the first time, I'm not embarrassing myself." He walked past her, back to the drawing room where whispers had already started to circulate. With newfound confidence, Julian addressed the room. I apologize for the interruption. I think we could all use some fresh air. Why don't we move to the terrace? As he guided the confused guests outside, Julian caught snippets of their conversations. Did you see him crying? It was just a servant girl singing. The Everleys have always been too soft on their staff. Julian clenched his jaw, but kept his composure. For the rest of the evening, he played the perfect host, though his mind was on the clock counting down to midnight. Naomi's hands shook as she finished her evening duties. Ma Eartha had given her extra work, sensing something was wrong, but not knowing exactly what had happened. Mrs. Everly seems upset, Martha had commented. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? No, ma'am, Naomi had lied, keeping her eyes down. Now, as the clock neared midnight, Naomi debated whether to go to the study. It could be a trap. Mrs. Everly might be waiting there to fire her. Or worse, Julian might have changed his mind about whatever had possessed him earlier, but something in his eyes had seemed sincere. The way he had looked at her, not with pity or anger, but with a kind of awakening, made her decide to take the risk. The manor was quiet as Naomi made her way to the study. The other servants had gone to bed, and the party guests had long since departed. Only a few lamps remained lit in the hallways. She hesitated outside the heavy oak door of the study, then knocked softly. Come in, Julian's voice called from inside. Naomi opened the door slowly. The study was warm with a fire crackling in the fireplace. Julian stood as she entered, looking both nervous and determined. You came, he said, sounding relieved. You asked me to, she replied simply. Julian gestured to a comfortable chair near the fire, not the hard wooden seat where servants usually perched when receiving instructions, but one of the plush armchairs reserved for famille and guests. Please, sit down. Naomi remained standing, unsure. Mr. Everly, if this is about what happened... Julian, he corrected her. Please call me Julian, at least when we're alone. The request shocked her. I can't do that, it's not proper. Nothing about tonight has been proper, Julian said with a small smile. And I'm glad for it. He moved closer to her. I asked them to leave, you know, all of them. I told them I wouldn't play host to anyone who laughed at your voice. Naomi's eyes widened. You didn't. I did. Julian's expression was serious now. Naomi, your singing. It made me feel something I haven't felt in years, maybe ever. He walked to his desk and picked up something, then returned and placed the items on a small table beside the chair he'd offered her. A blank notebook, a charcoal pencil, and some yellowed sheets of music. These were my mother's, he explained, touching the music sheets. She used to play piano before she decided it wasn't dignified enough for the lady of the house. Julian looked into Naomi's eyes. I want you to write your songs down now, not in secret, with me. Naomi stared at the items, then at Julian. Why are you doing this? Because I'm tired of living a lie, he said simply. This house, this life, it's all built on pretending we're better than others because of our name or our money, pretending we don't see the suffering we cause. He took a deep breath. But when you sang, I couldn't pretend anymore. Naomi slowly sank into the chair, overwhelmed. I could lose my job for this, for being here with you like this. You won't, Julian promised. Not while I have any say in the matter. In the quiet glow of the fire, with the echoes of her song still hanging in the walls, Naomi sat across from the heir of Everly Manor, and he watched. First, not with pity, not with pride, but with reverence. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. But for this moment, in this room, something had changed. A wall had crumbled. A truth had been spoken through song, and nothing at Everly Manor would ever be the same again. The next morning, Naomi woke before dawn as usual. For a moment, she wondered if last night had been a dream, sitting in the study with Julian Everly, him asking her to write down her songs, looking at her like she mattered. But the memory was too vivid to be imagination. It had happened, and now she didn't know what would come next. She dressed quickly in her plain black uniform and pulled her hair back into a tight bun. As she made her way to the kitchen to begin her morning duties, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the other servants. There you are, Martha said when Naomi entered. Mrs. Everly wants to see you, in the morning room, now. Naomi's heart sank. This was it. She was going to be fired. Yes, ma'am, she said quietly, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. The walk to the morning room felt like the longest of her life. When she arrived, Mrs. Everly was sitting ramrod straight in a high-backed chair, her face like stone. "Close the door," Mrs. Everly commanded. Naomi obeyed, then stood with her hands clasped in front of her, eyes on the floor. "Look at me when I speak to you," Mrs. Everly said sharply. Naomi raised her eyes, bracing herself. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," Mrs. Everly began, her voice cold as ice. "But it ends now. Whatever happened last night will not happen again. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mrs. Everly. My son has always been sensitive, too easily swayed by sentiment, but he is the heir to this estate, and he has responsibilities." Mrs. Everly's eyes narrowed. "Responsibilities that don't include fraternizing with the help." Naomi remained silent, knowing anything she said would only make things worse. "I should dismiss you immediately," Mrs. Everly continued. "But good help is hard to find these days, and you know this house well." She leaned forward slightly. "So here's what's going to happen. You will continue your duties as before. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not sing ever, and you will stay away from my son." "Yes, Mrs. Everly," Naomi whispered. "If you disobey, you won't just lose your position here. I'll make sure you never find work in this county again. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Everly waved her hand in dismissal. "You may go." Naomi turned to leave, relief washing over her that at least she still had her job. "And Naomi," Mrs. Everly called after her, "remember your place." Julian stood at the window of his bedroom, watching the gardeners work below. He hadn't slept much, his mind replaying the events of the previous night. Naomi's song, his tears, the way her eyes had widened when he'd offered her his mother's music sheets. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. His father, Richard Everly, entered the room. At 60, Richard was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the same blue eyes as Julian. "Son," he said, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." Julian turned to face his father. "If this is about last night—" "Of course it's about last night," Richard interrupted. "Your mother is beside herself. Senator Wilson and his family left early, and people are talking." "Let them talk," Julian said, turning back to the window. Richard sighed and moved to stand beside his son. "Julian, I understand that sometimes the pressures of your position can be overwhelming. But there are ways to handle that privately, not in front of half the county's elite." Julian laughed bitterly. "That's what you're worried about? How it looked? Appearances matter in our world. You know that." "Maybe that's the problem," Julian said quietly. "Maybe our world is built on appearances instead of truth." Richard studied his son's face. "What's gotten into you? This isn't like you." Julian was silent for a moment. "Did you ever think about them, Father? The people who work for us, their lives, their dreams?" "Of course I do. I pay them well. Better than most estates in the area." "But do you see them? Really see them?" Julian turned to face his father. "Last night I heard Naomi sing, and for the first time I actually saw her, not as a servant but as a person with extraordinary talent and passion." Richard frowned. "Naomi, the laundry girl. She's more than that," Julian said firmly. "And her voice, and Father, if you had heard it—" "This is about a servant girl." Richard's voice rose slightly. "Julian, you can't possibly—" "I'm not saying anything," Julian cut in. "I'm just telling you that hearing her made me think about things differently, about our family, our privilege." Richard placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. "Son, I know you have a good heart. That's why you'll make a fine master of Everly someday. But you need to be practical. We have a position to maintain. Responsibilities." "I know all about responsibility," Julian said, pulling away from his father's touch. "I've been raised on it my whole life." "Then act like it," Richard said, his voice hardening. "The Carmichael dinner is tomorrow night. They're expecting us, all of us. I want you there, composed and appropriate. Their daughter Elizabeth will be home from finishing school. She'd make a suitable match for you." Julian opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. There was no point arguing. Not yet. "Fine," he said at last. "I'll be there." Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Your mother has already spoken to the girl, Naomi. There won't be any more incidents." After his father left, Julian sat heavily on the edge of his bed. He should have known his mother would intervene. The question now was what to do about it. For the next 3 days, Naomi did her best to become invisible. She worked quietly, efficiently, keeping her eyes down and her voice silent. She didn't even hum when she thought she was alone. And she avoided Julian. Whenever she saw him coming, she would duck into another room or busy herself with some task that kept her back turned. It wasn't hard to do, the manor was large, and their worlds rarely intersected naturally. But she thought about him constantly, about the way he had looked at her in the study, about the notebook and pencil he had given her, which she had hidden beneath her thin mattress in the servants' quarters. On the third night, Naomi was finishing up in the laundry room when the door opened. She looked up, expecting to see Martha with more linens. Instead, Julian stood there. "You've been avoiding me," he said simply. Naomi glanced toward the door, worried someone might see them. "I have to," she said quietly. "Your mother made it very clear what would happen if I didn't." Julian's jaw tightened. "What did she say to you?" "It doesn't matter. She's right. I need to remember my place." "And what place is that?" Julian asked, stepping closer. "Below me, less worthy, is that what you think?" Naomi met his eyes then. "It's not what I think that matters. It's how the world is." "The world can change," Julian said softly. Naomi shook her head. "Not for people like me." Julian reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found this in the library." He unfolded it and handed it to her. It was a flyer for a music competition in the nearby city of Westfield. "Open to all voices" was printed across the top. "The prize is $500, Julian continued, "and a chance to perform at the Westfield Opera House." Naomi stared at the paper, then handed it back. "I can't." "Why no tea?" "Because I'm not allowed to sing, because I can't leave the estate, because I don't have fancy dresses or training or—" "I could help with all of that," Julian interrupted. "And then what?" Naomi asked, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. "Even if I won, which I wouldn't, nothing would change. I'd still be a servant. You'd still be you." Julian was quiet for a moment. "Have you been writing? In the notebook?" The sudden change of sub-J-E-C-T caught her off guard. Yes, a little." "Will you show me?" "No," she said quickly. "They're not ready. They're not good enough." "I bet they are," Julian said with a small smile. "Will you at least think about the competition? It's not for 2 months. There's time to prepare." Before Naomi could answer, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Julian quickly stepped back, tucking the flyer into his jacket again. Martha appeared in the doorway. "Naomi, are you finished?" "Oh." She stopped short when she saw Julian. "Mr. Everly, sir. I didn't know you were here." "Just looking for a missing cufflink," Julian said smoothly. "Naomi was helping me check if it had been picked up with the laundry." Martha looked suspicious but nodded. "Did you find it, sir?" "Unfortunately not. Perhaps it's in my dressing room after all. Thank you for your assistance, Naomi." He left without another glance at her, but Naomi could feel the weight of the unfinished conversation hanging in the air between them. The Carmichael dinner was every bit as tedious as Julian had expected. Elizabeth Carmichael was pretty enough, with her blonde curls and delicate features, but her conversation consisted mainly of gossip about people Julian barely knew. "And then she wore the same dress to both events," Elizabeth was saying with a scandalized expression. "Can you imagine?" Julian forced a smile. "How shocking!" Across the table, his mother watched them with approval. This was exactly the kind of match she had been hoping for. The Carmichaels were old money, respected throughout the county, and Elizabeth was the perfect society wife, decorative, well-connected, and completely unchallenging. Julian excused himself as soon as he politely could and stepped out onto the Carmichael's terrace for some air. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the sky. He thought of Naomi, probably still working back at Everleigh Manor. What would she think of a dinner like this? Of people who worried about repeated dresses while others barely had clothes to wear? Penny, for your thoughts. Julian turned to see Catherine Wilson, the senator's daughter his mother had introduced him to at the party, standing in the doorway. I doubt they're worth that much, Julian replied with a polite smile. Catherine joined him at the railing. You don't enjoy these dinners any more than I do you? Julian raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? The way you keep checking the clock, the forced smile. She shrugged. I recognize the signs. I've been using them myself for years. Despite himself, Julian laughed. Is it that obvious? Only to a fellow sufferer. Catherine smiled, and for the first time Julian noticed that her eyes were kind. Besides, after what had happened at your party the other night, I'd be surprised if you were in the mood for social gatherings. Julian tensed. You were there. I was. And before you ask, no, I don't think you made a fool of yourself. She looked out at the gardens. I thought it was rather refreshing to see someone feel something real in one of these stuffy events. Julian studied her with new interest. Most people didn't see it that way. Most people are afraid of anything genuine, Catherine said simply. It reminds them of all the feelings they've learned to suppress. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. The girl who was singing, Catherine said at last. She has an extraordinary voice. Julian nodded. She does. Have you told her that? I've tried. But it's complicated. Catherine smiled knowingly. Because she works for your family? Julian didn't answer, which was answer enough. You know, Catherine said thoughtfully, my father may be a senator now, but my grandmother was a maid. She worked for a family in Boston for 30 years. Julian looked at her in surprise. I didn't know that. It's not something we advertise in these circles, Catherine said with a wry smile. But it's true. And it's taught me that worth isn't determined by position or wealth. She placed a gentle hand on Julian's arm. Just something to think about. With that, she turned and went back inside, leaving Julian with his thoughts. When Julian returned to Everleigh Manor that night, the house was quiet. Most of the servants had gone to bed, and his parents had decided to stay overnight at the Carmichaels. He couldn't sleep. His conversation with Catherine kept playing in his mind, along with thoughts of Naomi and her song. On impulse, he got up and made his way to the music room. It had been years since anyone had used IT. His mother had given up playing piano long ago, claiming it took too much time from her social duties. Julian lit a lamp and sat at the grand piano, running his fingers over the dusty keys. He hadn't played since he was a boy, but he remembered some basics. Hesitantly, he began to pick out a simple melody. It was clumsy, nothing like the beautiful notes Naomi could produce with just her voice, but it felt good to create something. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the door open. I didn't know you played. Julian looked up to see Naomi standing in the doorway, a cleaning cloth in her hand. I don't really, he admitted. Not anymore. I heard the music, she explained. I thought someone had left a window open and it was coming from outside. Julian patted the bench beside him. Join me? Naomi hesitated, then slowly crossed the room and sat on the very edge of the bench, maintaining a proper distance. Can you play? Julian asked. She shook her head. I've never touched a piano in my life. Here, Julian said, taking her hand gently. Like this. He guided her fingers to the keys, showing her how to play a simple C major scale. Her hand was stiff at first, then gradually relaxed under his guidance. That's it, he encouraged, as she repeated the scale. You're a natural, Naomi smiled slightly. Hardly, but it's nice. They sat together in the soft tea lamplight, Julian showing her simple chords and melodies. It was the longest they had ever talked, and for a while, it seemed like the differences in their positions didn't exist. Have you thought more about the competition? Julian asked eventually. Naomi's smile faded. I can't do it, Julian. Even if I wanted to, which I'm not saying I do, how would I get away? How would I explain where I got a dress or the entry fee? I could help with all of that. And that would just make things worse, Naomi said. People would talk, they'd say things about us. Let them talk, Julian said fiercely. I don't care. You say that now, Naomi replied softly. But you haven't had to live with people whispering behind your back your whole life. Julian was silent for a moment. Will you at least sing for me, right now? Just for me? Naomi looked around nervously. Here? What if someone hears? Everyone's asleep. My parents aren't even home. Julian's eyes were pleading. Please, Naomi, one song. She took a deep breath, then nodded. One song. Naomi closed her eyes, gathering her courage. Then, softly at first, she began to sing. It was a folk song, something about a bird longing to be free. Her voice filled the music room, clear and true, and full of longing. Julian watched her, mesmerized. In that moment, he knew he would do anything to help her share that gift with the world. When the last note faded, Naomi opened her eyes to find Julian staring at her with such intensity that she had to look away. You have to enter that competition, he said quietly. You have to. Before she could respond, a harsh voice broke the spell. What is going on here? They both turned to see Martha standing in the doorway, her face a mask of shock and disapproval. I heard music, Martha said, her eyes darting between them. I never expected. This is completely inappropriate. Julian stood quickly. Martha, this isn't what you think. It's not my place to think anything, Mr. Everly, Martha said stiffly. But I will have to inform Mrs. Everly when she returns. No, Julian said firmly. You won't. Because nothing happened here that shouldn't have. Naomi was cleaning, and I asked her to listen while I played. That's all. Martha's expression made it clear she didn't believe him. It's true, Naomi said, standing as well. I was just doing my job. Martha looked unconvinced. Naomi, go to your room, now. We'll discuss this in the morning. Naomi glanced at Julian, then hurried past Martha and out the door. Martha, Julian began once Naomi was gone. With all due respect, Mr. Everly, Martha interrupted. I've worked for your family for 30 years. I've watched you grow up, and I care about what happens to you. Her expression softened slightly. Whatever you think you're doing with that girl, it can only lead to trouble. For both of you. With that, she turned and left, leaving Julian alone in the music room with the echo of Naomi's song still hanging in the air. The next morning, Naomi was up before dawn, her stomach in knots. She'd barely slept, worrying about what Martha would say or do. Would she tell Mrs. Everly? Would Naomi lose her job? When she arrived in the kitchen, Martha was already there, giving instructions to the other servants. She looked up when Naomi entered, her expression unreadable. Naomi, come with me, Martha said, walking toward the small office where she kept the household accounts. Once inside with the door closed, Martha turned to face her. Sit down. Naomi perched on the edge of a wooden chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've worked at Everly Manor for 3 decades, Martha began. I've seen things, complications between the family and the staff. It never ends well, Naomi. Never. Nothing happened, Naomi said quietly. He was playing the piano, that's all. Martha sighed. You were singing, I heard you. Naomi looked down at her hands. There was no point denying it. And the way he was looking at you... Martha shook her head. I'm not blind, girl. Are you going to tell Mrs. Everly? Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha was quiet for a long moment. No, not this time. Naomi's head shot up in surprise. But this is your only warning, Martha continued firmly. Whatever is happening between you and Mr. Everly, it stops now. You're a smart girl. You know it can't lead anywhere good. There's nothing happening, Naomi insisted. Then keep it that way. Martha's expression softened slightly. I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm trying to protect you. Mrs. Everly won't be as understanding as I am. I understand, Naomi said. Thank you. Go on now. The breakfast trays need to be prepared. As Naomi left the office, relief washed over her. She had been given a reprieve, but Martha was right. Whatever was happening between her and Julian had to stop, for both their sakes. Julian sat at the breakfast table, pushing eggs around his plate without eating them. His mother was discussing plans for the upcoming garden party, but he was barely listening. "Julian, are you paying attention?" Mrs. Everly asked sharply. "Sorry, Mother, what were you saying?" "I was saying that the Carmichaels will be attending and Elizabeth seemed quite taken with you." Mrs. Everly smiled. "Her mother hinted that she wouldn't be opposed to you calling on her." Julian set down his fork. "I'm not interested in Elizabeth Carmichael." His mother's smile froze. "Don't be ridiculous. She's perfect for Yo-Yo. Beautiful, well-bred, from an excellent family." "And completely vapid," Julian muttered. "Julian!" his father warned from behind his newspaper. "I'm sorry, but it's true," Julian said. "We have nothing in common. I couldn't spend an evening with her, let alone a lifetime." Mrs. Everly's face hardened. "This isn't about that servant girl, is it? Because Martha mentioned—" "Martha mentioned what?" Julian interrupted, suddenly alert. "That she saw lights in the music room late last night. She said you were playing the piano." Mrs. Everly's eyes narrowed. "Was someone with you?" Julian held his mother's gaze steadily. "No, I couldn't sleep and thought playing might help. I'm sorry if the noise disturbed anyone." Mrs. Everly studied him for a moment, then seemed to accept his explanation. "Well, regardless, I expect you to be more receptive to Elizabeth. The Carmichaels are exactly the kind of connection our family needs." Julian didn't respond. His mind was racing. Martha hadn't told his mother about Naomi being in the music room with him. Why? And more importantly, what had she said to Naomi? After breakfast, Julian made his way to the library, needing time to think. He was surprised to find Catherine Wilson there browsing the shelves. "Miss Wilson," he said, "I didn't know you were visiting today." Catherine turned with a smile. "My father had business with yours. I hope you don't mind me exploring your library while they talk." "Not at all." Julian gestured to the books. "Find anything interesting?" "Several things," Catherine said, pulling a volume from the shelf, "including this." She handed him the book. It was a collection of folk songs from around the country. "I thought your friend might like it," Catherine said quietly. "The one with the beautiful voice." Julian stared at her, then glanced toward the door to make sure no one was listening. "Why are you doing this?" Catherine shrugged. "Because I know what it's like to want something that everyone says you can't have." "And what is it that you want, Miss Wilson?" Julian asked curiously. "To be taken seriously," she replied simply. "To be valued for my mind, not just as a senator's daughter and someone's future wife." She tapped the book in his hands. "There's a song in there called The Caged Bird. I think she might find it relevant." Before Julian could respond, the library door opened and Senator Wilson entered with Jewel Ian's father. "Ah, there you are, Catherine," the senator said. "Ready to go?" "Yes, Father." Catherine turned to Julian. "Thank you for the use of your library, Mr. Everly. It was most enlightening." As she left with her father, Julian looked down at the book in his hands. Catherine Wilson was proving to be a surprising ally. For the next week, Naomi did her best to avoid Julian. It wasn't easy. He seemed to be everywhere. In the hallways when she was cleaning, in the garden when she was hanging laundry, in the dining room when she was serving. But she kept her distance, kept her eyes down, and most of all kept silent. No humming, no singing, not even when she was alone in the laundry room late at night. The notebook Julian had given her remained hidden under her mattress. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, she would take it out and look at the few songs she had written down. Then she would quickly hide it again, afraid of being caught with such a treasure. One afternoon, Naomi was dusting in the library when she noticed a book on the table that hadn't been there before. It was a collection of folk songs, and a page was marked with a small piece of paper. Curious, Naomi opened the book to the marked page. The song was titled The Caged Bird. Next to it on the piece of paper was a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Music speaks what cannot be expressed, soothes the mind and gives it rest, heals the heart and makes it whole, flows from heaven to the soul." Naomi's hand trembled as she read the words. She knew the book had been left for her. But by whom? Julian? It didn't seem like his handwriting. She quickly closed the book and continued her dusting. Later, when no one was looking, she slipped the book and note into her apron pocket. That night, in her small room, Naomi read through The Sea, Aged Bird. It was a beautiful, sad song about a bird who sang despite being imprisoned. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Using the charcoal pencil Julian had given her, she copied the lyrics into her notebook, then began to work on her own melody for the words. It came easily, flowing from somewhere deep inside her. For the first time in days, Naomi felt a spark of hope. Maybe Julian was right. Maybe her voice could be heard beyond the walls of Everly Nor. The day of the garden party arrived, bringing with it perfect weather and dozens of guests from the county's finest families. The Everly grounds were transformed with white tents, floral arrangements, and tables laden with food and champagne. Julian stood by his mother's side, greeting guests with practiced charm, but his eyes kept scanning the crowd, looking for Catherine Wilson. She had promised to attend, and he had questions for her about the bouquet she had left for Naomi. "Julian, darling, the Carmichaels are here," his mother said, nudging him. "Go greet Elizabeth." Dutifully, Julian made his way to where Elizabeth stood with her parents. She looked pretty in a pale blue dress, her blonde curls arranged perfectly under a small hat. "Miss Carmichael," Julian said with a bow, "you look lovely today." Elizabeth smiled brightly. "Thank you, Mr. Everly. What a beautiful party. Your mother has outdone herself." "She always does," Julian replied, offering his arm. "Would you care to walk through the rose garden? The blooms are at their peak right now." As they strolled among the roses, Julian made polite conversation, asking about Elizabeth's interests and family. She spoke at length about her recent shopping trip to New York and the latest fashions, while Julian nodded and made appropriate responses. "Oh, there's Catherine Wilson," Elizabeth said sudden lie, wrinkling her nose slightly. "Have you met her? She's so opinionated, always talking about books and politics as if she were a man." Julian bristled at the criticism. "I find Miss Wilson quite refreshing, actually." Elizabeth looked surprised. "Really? I suppose some men do like intellectual women. I've always thought it's better to let men do the thinking," she giggled. "That's what my mother says anyway." Julian fought the urge to roll his eyes. "If you'll excuse me for a moment, Miss Carmichael, I see someone I need to speak with briefly." Before Elizabeth could protest, Julian made his way across the lawn to where Catherine stood watching a croquet match. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her, "thank you for coming." Catherine smiled. "I wouldn't miss it. Your mother throws the most talked-about parties in the county." Julian lowered his voice. "Thank you for the book. Naomi found it." "Good," Catherine said. "Did she like the song I marked?" "I don't know. I haven't had a chance to speak with her." Julian glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "My mother has been watching me like a hawk, and Naomi has been avoiding me." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Probably wise of her, but unfortunate." She took a sip of champagne. "The competition in Westfield is coming up soon, isn't it?" Julian looked at her in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "I have my sources," Catherine said with a small smile, "and I might be able to help if you're interested." "Help how?" "My aunt lives in Westfield. She's a music teacher. If your friend could get there, my aunt could help her prepare for the competition." Julian's mind raced with possibilities. "That would be incredible, but I don't know how to arrange it. Naomi never leaves the estate." "Leave that to me," Catherine said. "Just be ready to act when the time comes." Before Julian could ask what she meant, his mother appeared at his side. "Julian, you're neglecting Miss Carmichael," Mrs. Everly said with a tight smile. "Miss Wilson, how lovely to see you." "Mrs. Everly," Catherine replied politely. "I was just telling your son how much I admire your roses. Would it be possible to have a cutting to take home? My mother is quite the gardener." Mrs. Everly seemed pleased by the request. "Of course, dear Julian. Why don't you escort Miss Wilson to the rose garden and have one of the gardeners prepare a cutting for her?" It was the perfect opportunity. As they walked toward the rose garden, Julian filled Catherine in on everything that had happened with Naomi since the night of the party. "Martha caught you?" Catherine said, surprised. "And she didn't tell your mother?" "No, I'm not sure why. Maybe she has a romantic streak after all." Catherine mused. But Julian, you need to be careful. If your mother finds out... I know, Julian sighed, but Naomi's voice, it deserves to be heard, and she deserves a chance at something better than being a servant all her life. Catherine squeezed his arm gently. I agree, and I'm going to help you both. She looked around to make sure they were alone. Next Saturday, my father is hosting a dinner party. Your family is invited, of course. I remember my mother meant he wanted. Perfect. I'll arrange for my aunt to send a letter requesting help with music for the event. She'll specifically ask for someone who can sing. Catherine's eyes sparkled with the intrigue. Your mother won't be able to refuse a request from a senator's sister, especially if it means getting in her good graces. Julian stared at her. You'd do all that for us? Why? Catherine's expression grew serious. Because talent like hers shouldn't be silence-said, and because... She hesitated. Because I know what it's like to have dreams that don't fit the life others have planned for you. They had reached the rose garden, where several servants were working. Julian spotted Naomi at the far end, cutting roses for the dining table centerpieces. There she is, he said softly. Catherine followed his gaze. She's beautiful. Yes, Julian agreed. Inside and out. Catherine studied his face for a moment. You see are for her very much, don't you? Julian didn't answer, but his expression said everything. Well then, Catherine said briskly. Let's make sure our plan works. Leave everything to me for now. Just make sure you can get a message to her before Saturday. Naomi was cutting roses for the dining room when she saw Julian walking with a young woman in an elegant green dress. They seemed deep in conversation, heads bent close together. A pang of something jealousy shot through her. How ridiculous. Julian Everly was the master's son, heir to the estate. Of course he would be walking with beautiful, well-dressed young women. That was his world. Naomi turned back to her task, carefully avoiding the thorns as she cut the perfect blooms. Mrs. Everly was very particular about the dining room flowers. They had to be flawless. Excuse me. Naomi looked up to see the young woman in the green dress standing in front of her. Julian was a few steps behind, his expression unreadable. Yes, miss, Naomi said, dropping into a small curtsy. I understand you have quite the eye for flowers, the woman said. Julian tells me you arrange all the most beautiful bouquets in the house. Naomi glanced at Julian in surprise. Yes. I do the arrangements for the dining room and Mrs. Everly's sitting room. Wonderful. I'm Catherine Wilson. My father is hosting a dinner party next weekend, and I'm in desperate need of someone with your talent. Catherine smiled warmly. Would you be able to come to our house on Saturday to do the arrangements? I'd make it worth your while. Naomi hesitated. That's not up to me, miss. I'd have to ask Mrs. Everly. Of course, Catherine said. I've already mentioned it to her and she seemed amenable, but I wanted to speak with you personally. She lowered her voice slightly. I hear you have otter talents as well. Musical ones. Naomi froze, her eyes darting to Julian, who gave a slight nod. My aunt is visiting, Catherine continued casually. She's a music teacher in Westfield. She's always looking for new voices. Understanding dawned on Naomi. This was about the competition. I'd be happy to help with your flowers, Miss Wilson, Naomi said carefully. Wonderful, Catherine beamed. Julian, would you mind fetching one of those pink roses over there? I think it would be perfect for my mother. As Julian moved away, Catherine quickly pressed something into Naomi's hand. Read this when you're alone, she whispered. And Naomi, your voice deserves to be heard. Before Naomi could respond, Catherine stepped back just as Julian returned with a pink rose. Thank you both, Catherine said in a normal voice. I look forward to seeing you on Saturday, Naomi. As they walked away, Naomi slipped the folded D piece of paper into her pocket, her heart racing. What had just happened? And why was this elegant young woman helping her? That night, alone in her room, Naomi unfolded the note Catherine had given her. My aunt will help you prepare for the Westfield competition. Bring your songs. This is your chance. Trust me, and trust Julian. He believes in you, so do I. C.W. Naomi read the note 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. Then she took out her notebook, okay, the one Julian had given her, and looked at the songs she had written. They were simple, raw, straight from her heart. Could she really do this? Enter a competition? Sing in front of strangers? The thought was terrifying, but even more terrifying was the thought of spending the rest of her life in silence, her songs unsung, her voice unheard. Naomi made her decision. She would go to the Wilson house on Saturday. She would meet Catherine's aunt, and she would take this chance, whatever it might lead to. The days leading up to Saturday crawled by. Naomi went about her duties as usual, but inside she was a bundle of nerves and excitement. She practiced her songs silently in her head, mouthing the words when no one was looking. Julian managed to speak with her briefly on Friday evening, catching her alone in the hallway outside the library. "Catherine's arranged everything," he said in a low voice. "Her auntie is expecting you. She's a wonderful teacher." "I'm scared," Naomi admitted. "What if I'm not good enough?" Julian's eyes were intense. "You are. You're more than good enough, Naomi. You're extraordinary." The conviction in his voice gave her courage. "Thank you for everything you're doing." "Don't thank me yet," Julian said with a small smile. "Save that for when you win the competition." Naomi laughed softly. "You're very confident. In you, always." The sound of approaching footsteps forced them to step apart. It was Martha, eyeing them suspiciously. "Naomi, Mrs. Everly is looking for you," she said. "Something about the arrangements for tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am, right away." Naomi hurried off, but not before casting one last glance at Julian over her shoulder. Martha watched her go, then turned to Julian. "Mr. Everly, a word?" Julian braced himself. "Yes, Martha." "I don't know what's going on between you and that girl," Martha said bluntly. "And I don't want to know. But I've watched you grow up, and I care about what happens to you." Her expression softened slightly. "Just be careful, both of you." Before Julian could respond, Martha walked away, leaving him wondering once again whose side she was really on. Saturday arrived with perfect summer weather. Naomi was up at dawn, too nervous to sleep. She packed her notebook carefully in a small cloth baigie, along with the folk song book Catherine had left for her. Mrs. Everly had instructed her to take the morning coach to the Wilson estate, where she would prepare the flower arrangements for the evening's dinner party. She was to return on the evening coach, which would have her back at Everly Manor by 9 o'clock. "I expect you to represent this house well," Mrs. Everly had said sternly. "The Wilsons are important people. Don't embarrass us." "Yes, M.R. is Everly," Naomi had replied, keeping her eyes lowered to hide her excitement. Now, as she sat on the coach watching the countryside roll by, Naomi felt a freedom she had never experienced before. She had rarely left the Everly estate in all her years of service. The world outside seemed so vast, so full of possibilities. The Wilson estate was smaller than Everly Manor, but just as elegant. A maid met Naomi at the door and led her to a sunny room where fresh flowers waited in buckets of water. "Miss Wilson will be with you shortly," the maid said. "She said you're to make yourself comfortable." Left alone, Naomi began to sort through the flowers, planning the arrangements in her mind. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the door open. "You must be Naomi." She turned to see an older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. There was a resemblance to Catherine in the shape of her facee and the directness of her gaze. "Yes, ma'am," Naomi said, curtsying slightly. "I'm Eleanor Wilson, Catherine's aunt." The woman smiled warmly. "You don't need to curtsy to me, dear. Catherine tells me you have a remarkable voice." Naomi blushed. "I don't know about remarkable." "Well, I'll be the judge of that," Eleanor said briskly. "But first, let's get these arrangements done so we can focus on the music. Catherine has arranged for us to have the music room all afternoon." As they worked together on the flower arrangements, Eleanor chatted easily about her life in Westfield, where she taught music to young ladies from good families. "But talent doesn't care about social standing," she said, fixing Naomi with a meaningful look. "Some of the finest voices I've ever heard have come from the most unexpected places." By the time they finished the flowers, Naomi felt comfortable with Eleanor. There was so meething about the older woman that inspired trust. "Now," Eleanor said, leading Naomi to a beautifully appointed music room with a grand piano. "Let's hear what you can do." Naomi hesitated. "I don't have any training, I just sing." "That's where all great singers start," Eleanor said encouragingly. "Just sing whatever feels natural to you." Taking a deep breath, Naomi began to sing The Caged Bird. Her voice was soft at first, then grew stronger as she lost herself in the music. When she finished, Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "Well?" Naomi asked nervously. "My dear," Eleanor said at last, "Catherine didn't exaggerate. Your voice is a gift, a rare and precious gift." Relief washed over Naomi. "Really? Really?" Eleanor moved to the piano. "Now, about this competition. We have some work to do." For the next several hours, Eleanor worked with Naomi on breathing techniques, posture, and how to project her voice to fill a concert hall. She helped Naomi choose 3 songs for the competition, 1 traditional folk song, 1 spiritual, and 1 original composition from Naomi's notebook. "This one," Eleanor said, pointing to a song Naomi had written called Freedom's Light. "This will be your showpiece. It's raw, honest, and it comes from your heart." As the afternoon wore on, Naomi's confidence grew. Under Eleanor's guidance, her voice became stronger, more controlled but no less emotional. "You're a natural," Eleanor said. "With a bit more practice, you'll be ready for Westfield." "But how will I practice?" Naomi, too, asked. "I can't sing at Everleigh Manor." "Leave that to Catherine and me," Eleanor said with a smile. "We'll find a way." As the sun began to set, Catherine joined them in the music room. "How did it go?" she asked eagerly. "She's extraordinary," Eleanor said. "With a bit more work, she could win this competition easily." Catherine beamed at Naomi. "I knew it. Julian was right about you." At the mention of Julian's name, Naomi blushed. "Is he coming tonight for the dinner party?" "Yes, with his parents," Catherine confirmed. "But you'll be on your way back to Everleigh by then. We can't risk Mrs. Everleigh suspecting anything." Naomi nodded, understanding the caution. "Now," Catherine continued, "we need to figure out how to get you to Westfield for the competition. It's in 3 weeks." "I could never get away for a whole day," Naomi said worriedly. "Mrs. Everleigh would never allow it." "Leave that to me," Catherine said with a determined gleam in her eye. "I have a plan." As Naomi prepared to leave, Eleanor handed her a small book. "Vocal exercises," she explained. "Practice these whenever you can, even if you have to mouth the words silently." Catherine walked Naomi to the waiting coach. "You were amazing today," she said. "I could hear you from the garden." "Thank you," Naomi said sincerely, "for everything you're doing. I don't understand why, but I'm grateful." Catherine smiled. "Let's just say I believe talent should be nurtured, no matter where it comes from." She squeezed Naomi's hand. "And Julian Everleigh isn't the only one who can recognize something special when he sees it." As the coach pulled away, Naomi felt a mix of emotions, hope, excitement, fear. She was taking a risk, the biggest of her life. But for the first time, she could see a future beyond the walls of Everleigh Manor, a future where her voice, could be heard. The 3 weeks leading up to the Westfield competition passed in a blur for Naomi. During the day, she went about her duties at Everleigh Manor as usual, keeping her head down and her voice silent. But at night, alone in her tiny room, she practiced the vocal exercises Eleanor had taught her, mouthing the words silently or singing in the barest whisper. Twice more, Catherine invited her to the Wilson estate to help with flowers, and each time, Eleanor worked with her on her competition pieces. Naomi's voice grew stronger, more controlled, but no less emotional. Julian found ways to speak with her briefly, a moment in the garden, a quick exchange in an empty hallway. Each time his encouragement gave her strength. "You're going to win," he would say, his eyes shining with certainty. "I know it." But as the competition drew closer, a practical problem remained. How would Naomi get permission to be away for an entire day? The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days before the competition, Martha called Naomi into her office. "Close the door," she said, her expression serious. Naomi's heart sank. Had Martha discovered their plans? I know what you've been doing, Martha said once the door was closed. The singing lessons with Miss Wilson's aunt. Naomi stood frozen, unable to speak. Miss Catherine came to see me yesterday, Martha continued. She told me about the competition in Westfield. I'm sorry, Naomi whispered. I know I should have asked permission. Martha held up a hand to stop her. I've worked for the Everleys for 30 years, Naomi. In all that time, I've watched talented people waste away in service because that's what was expected of them. Her eyes softened. My own sister had a beautiful voice, not unlike yours, but she never got the chance to use it. Naomi looked at T. Martha in surprise. She had never heard the housekeeper speak so personally before. The competition is on Saturday, Martha said. I'm giving you the day off. I'll tell Mrs. Everly you're visiting an ailing aunt in Westfield. But if she finds out, she won't, Martha said firmly. Not from me. Tears sprang to Naomi's eyes. Why are you helping me? Martha's face softened further. Because some rules deserve to be broken, and because that voice of yours is a gift that shouldn't be hidden. She pulled a small package from her desk drawer. Miss Catherine left this for you, said you'd need it for Saturday. Naomi unwrapped the package to find a simple but elegant blue dress, nicer than anything she had ever owned. Thank you, she whispered, overcome with emotion. Martha nodded briskly, her momentary softness already fading. Just don't make me regret it. And Naomi, she hesitated. Be careful with young Mr. Everly. His world is not your world, no matter how much either of you might wish otherwise. On the morning of the competition, Naomi woke before dawn, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She dressed quickly in her regular clothes, packing the blue dress Catherine had given her in a small bag, along with her notebook of songs. Martha met her at the servants' entrance. The carriage is waiting at the end of the lane, she said quietly. Miss Catherine E. arranged it. Thank you, Naomi said, giving the older woman a quick, impulsive hug. Martha stiffened, then patted Naomi's back awkwardly. Go on now, and good luck. The carriage ride to Westfield took an hour. As they traveled, Naomi watched the countryside give way to the small city with its neat houses and busy streets. Westfield was the largest place she had ever been, and she couldn't help but stare at the shop windows and the people hurrying along the sidewalks. The carriage stopped in front of a modest house on a tree-lined street. Miss Eleanor is expecting you, the driver said, helping Naomi down. Eleanor greeted her warmly at the door. You're right on time. Come in, come in. We have much to do before the competition. Inside, Naomi changed into the blue dress. It fit perfectly, the color bringing out the warm tones in her dark skin. You look beautiful, Eleanor said, helping Naomi style her hair. Now let's warm up your voice. For the next hour, they practiced Naomi's songs one last time. Despite her nerves, Naomi's voice was strong and clear. Remember, Eleanor said as they prepared to leave for the opera house, sing from your heart. That's where your true power lies. The Westfield Opera House was smaller than Naomi had imagined, but still grand with its red velvet seats and crystal chandeliers. Backstage, other competitors milled about tea. Women and men of all ages, some dressed in fancy costumes, others in simple clothes like Naomi. There are 20 contestants, Eleanor explained. The judges will select 5 finalists and then choose a winner from among them. Naomi nodded, too nervous to speak. She peeked through the curtain at the filling auditorium. Her heart nearly stopped when she spotted Julian in the 3rd row, with Catherine beside him. They came, she whispered. Eleanor Fole owed her gaze. Of course they did. They believe in you. What if I fail? Naomi asked, suddenly overwhelmed. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Then you'll have been brave enough to try. That's more than most people ever do. One by one, the contestants performed. Some were clearly trained singers with powerful voices. Others were more modest in their talents. Naomi listened, her anxiety growing with each performance. Finally, her name was called. And now Mrs. Naomi Parker, singing Freedom's Light. Naomi walked onto the stage, her legs trembling. The lights were bright, the audience a blur, but as she took her place at the center of the stage, she found Julian's face in the crowd. He smiled at her, and in that moment her fear melted away. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The song was her own. Words that had come to her late at night in her tiny room at Everleigh Manor. It spoke of hope and longing, of dreams deferred but not defeated, of a light that could never be extinguished, no matter how dark the night. As she sang, Naomi forgot about the competition, the judges, the audience. She was singing for herself, for her mother, who had taught her to find joy in music, for all those who had been told to stay silent. And she was singing for Julian, who had heard her when no one else was listening. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes. Julian was the first to stand, his face radiant with pride and something else, something that made Naomi's heart skip a beat. She left the stage in a daze, barely hearing the congratulations from the other contestants. "That was extraordinary," Eleanor said, hugging her tightly. "Absolutely extraordinary." The judges took nearly an hour to deliberate. When they returned, the Master of Ceremonies called the 5 finalists to the stage. Naomi's name was among them. Another round of performances followed. Naomi sang her folk song this time, pouring her soul into every word. When all 5 finalists had performed, the judges conferred again. And the winner of the Westfield vocal competition, the Master of Ceremonies announced, with a prize of $500 and a performance at next M.'s Westfield Gala, Miss Naomi Parker. The audience cheered. Naomi stood frozen in disbelief until Eleanor gently pushed her forward to accept the engraved silver trophy and envelope containing the prize money. "Thank you," Naomi managed to say through her tears. "Thank you so much." Backstage, Julian and Catherine were waiting for her. "You were magnificent," Catherine said, embracing her warmly. Julian stood a few steps back, his eyes shining with emotion. "I knew you could do it," he said softly. "From the first time I heard you sing." Naomi wanted to run to him, to throw her arms around him, but she held back, aware of the people around them. "We should celebrate," Catherine said, looking between them with understanding. "My aunt has prepared a small reception at her house." The celebration was intimate, just Naomi, Julian, Catherine, and Eleanor. They toasted Naomi's success with champagne, and Tal cared excitedly about her performance at the upcoming gala. "This could be just the beginning," Eleanor said. "With your talent, you could study music professionally. There are scholarships for exceptional students." Naomi's head was spinning with possibilities. A life she had never dared to imagine was suddenly within reach. As the evening wore on, Catherine and Eleanor tactfully withdrew to the kitchen, leaving Julian and Naomi alone in the small parlor. "I'm so proud of you," Julian said, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. "You showed everyone what I've known all along, that your voice is something special." "I couldn't have done it without you," Naomi said. "You were the first person who ever really heard me." Julian took her hand. "Naomi, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, watching you find your voice, your courage, it's changed me. I don't want to go back to the way things were." Naomi's heart raced. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care for you more than I should according to the rules of our world, but I don't care about those rules anymore." Julian's eyes were intense, determined. "I want to help you pursue your music, whatever it takes." "Julian, be realistic," Naomi said softly. "You're the heir to Everleigh Manor. I'm a servant. Your parents would never accept—" "I don't care what they accept," Julian interrupted. "For the rest time in my life, I know what I want, who I want." Before Naomi could respond, the grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times. "The carriage," she gasped. "I have to be back at Everleigh by 9, or Martha will be in trouble." Reality crashed back in. No matter what had happened today, she was still bound to Everleigh Manor and its rules. Julian's face fell, but he nodded. "Of course. We should go." The carriage ride back was mostly silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The day had been magical, but now the real world was reasserting itself. As they neared Everleigh Manor, Julian finally spoke. "This isn't over, Naomi. Today was just the beginning." She looked at him, wanting to believe but afraid to hope. "How can it be anything else? Mrs. Everleigh would never allow me to keep singing, especially not if she knew you were involved." "Then we won't tell her, not yet." Julian took her hand. "The gala is in 4 weeks. We'll find a way for you to be there. And after that, we'll figure something out. Together." The carriage stopped at the end of the lane, out of sight of the main house. "I have to go in through the servants' entrance," Naomi said. Julian nodded. "I know." He hesitated, then leaned forward and gently kissed her cheek. "Until tomorrow." Naomi watched him walk toward the front of the house, her cheek tingling where his lips had head it. Then she gathered her things and hurried down the lane toward the servants' entrance. Martha was waiting for her, looking anxious. "You're cutting it close," she said. "Mrs. Everly was asking about you earlier." "What did you tell her?" Naomi asked, quickly changing out of the blue dress and into her uniform. "That you'd be back by 9 as agreed." Martha looked at Naomi expectantly. "Well, how did it go?" Naomi couldn't contain her smile. "I won." Martha's eyes widened. "You won? The whole competition?" Naomi nodded, pulling out the envelope with the prize money. $500 and a performance at the Westfield Gala next month. "My word," Martha breathed. "Naomi, that's wonderful." Her expression turned serious. "But you know Mrs. Everly will never let you go to that gala." "I know," Naomi said, her joy dimming slightly. "But Julian says we'll find a way." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Julia N., is it? Not Mr. Everly?" Naomi blushed, realizing her slip. "He asked me to call him that when we're alone." Martha sighed. "Be careful, girl. That boy may mean well, but he's still an Everly, and his mother would sooner burn this house down than see her son involved with a servant." "It's not like that," Naomi protested, though her burning cheek said otherwise. "Isn't it?" Martha gave her a knowing look. "I've seen the way he looks at you, and the way you look at him." Before Naomi could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway outside. "Go on to your room," Martha whispered. "We'll talk more tomorrow." Naomi slipped away, clutching her bag with the blue dress and her prize money. Despite Martha's warnings, her heart was full. For one perfect day, she had been free to sing, free to dream, free to feel Julian's kiss on her cheek without fear. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage. Her voice had been heard, and nothing could take that away from her. The next morning, Naomi was serving breakfast when Julian and his parents entered the dining room. She kept her eyes down, fighting a smile as she poured their coffee. "Julian, you were out quite late last night," Mrs. Everly remarked. "The Carmichaels were disappointed you couldn't join them for dinner." "I had a previous engagement with Catherine Wilson," Julian replied, catching Naomi's eye briefly as she served his toast. "Catherine?" Mrs. Everly looked surprised. "Well, I suppose the Wilsons are a respectable family, though not quite at the level of the Carmichaels." "Catherine is intelligent and interesting," Julian said, "unlike many of the young women you keep pushing at me." Mrs. Everly pursed her lips. "There's no need to be difficult, Julian. I'm only thinking of your future." "So am I, Mother. So am I." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Naomi could feel Julian watching her whenever she entered the room. It made her nervous and excited all at once. Later that afternoon, Julian found her in the garden, cutting fresh flowers for the house. "I meant what I said yesterday," he told her quietly. "About us figuring things out together." Naomi glanced around anxiously. "Someone might see us talking." "Let them," Julian said, though he lowered his voice. "Naomi, I can't stop thinking about your performance. You were radiant up there, so full of life and passion. That's who you really are. Not this person forced to move silently through the house, afraid to let her voice be heard. But this is my reality," Naomi said. "At least for now." "It doesn't have to be," Julian insisted. "With the prize money, you could go to Westfield, study with Eleanor. Catherine says her aunt would be happy to take you on as a student." Naomi's heart leapt at the thought, but then reality intruded. "And what about you?" Julian hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I know I want to be part of your life, however that looks." Before Naomi could respond, they heard someone approaching. Julian quickly moved away, pretending to examine a rose bush. It was Catherine coming up the garden path. "Julian, your mother said I'd find you out here." She smiled at Naomi. "Hello again. Those roses are beautiful." "Thank you, Miss Wilson," Naomi said formally. Catherine winked at her when Julian's back was turned. "I've come with an invitation," she announced. My aunt was so impressed with the talent at the competition that she's hosting a small musical evening next weekend. She specifically asked if Naomi might be able to help with the arrangements. Julian caught on immediately. What a lovely idea. I'm sure Mother wouldn't mind, especially after how well Naomi did with the flowers for your dinner party. I'll ask Mrs. Everly, Naomi said, playing along. Wonderful, Catherine beamed. And Julian, you and your parents are invited to attend, of course. As they continued to chat, Naomi marveled at how easily Catherine created these opportunities for them. She was a true friend, risking her own reputation to help a servant girl pursue her dreams. But how long could this charade continue? Eventually, Mrs. Everly would become suspicious. And what about the gala? There was no way Naomi could disappear for an entire evening without questions being asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days late, Richard Everly, Julian's father, called Naomi to his study. She entered nervously, wondering what she could have done wrong. "Close the door," he said, his expression unreadable. Naomi obeyed, standing with her hands clasped in front of her. "I received an interesting letter this morning," Richard said, picking up a piece of paper from his desk. "From the organizers of the Westfield vocal competition. They were quite effusive in their praise of a certain Naomi Parker, winner of this year's contest." Naomi's blood ran cold. "Sir, Richard held up a hand. "Let me finish. The letter goes on to say that Miss Parker is scheduled to perform at the Westfield Gala next month, and they wanted to personally invite me and my family to attend, as Miss Parker is, and I quote, a member of your household staff." He set the letter down and looked at Naomi directly. "Would you care to explain?" Naomi swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I entered the competition. I won. I didn't think anyone would find out. And how exactly did you manage to enter this competition? Who gave you permission to leave the estate?" "No one, sir," Naomi said, deciding to protect Martha. I went on my day off." Richard studied her for a moment. "And does my son know about this?" Naomi hesitated. "Yes, sir. He encouraged me." To her surprise, Richard didn't look angry. "Sit down, Naomi." She perched on the edge of a chair, bracing herself for dismissal. "I heard you sing," Richard said quietly. "The night of the party. I was in the library when your voice carried through the open door." Naomi looked up in surprise. "It was quite moving," Richard continued. "I've never heard Julian react to anything the way he reacted to your song." He leaned back in his chair. "My son has always been different from me, more sensitive, more attuned to things I never paid attention to. I didn't always understand him." He stood and walked to the window. "But seeing him that night, hearing how your voice affected him, it made me think about the kind of man I've been, the kind of master." Naomi remained silent, unsure where this was going. "My own grandfather was a mill worker," Richard said, turning back to face her. "He worked 14 hours a day to put my father through school. My father became a lawyer, made so many shrewd investments, and eventually bought Everly Manor." He smiled slightly. "My wife doesn't like me to talk about that. She prefers people to think the Everlys have always been gentry." "I didn't know, sir," Naomi said softly. "Few do." Richard returned to his desk. "The point is, I understand something about rising above one's station, and I recognize genuine talent when I see it." He picked up the letter again. "I'm going to allow you to perform at this gala." Naomi's eyes widened. "You are?" "Yes, and furthermore, I'm going to speak with Eleanor Wilson about arranging proper training for you." He held up a hand when Naomi started to speak. "I know all about Julian's visits to Catherine and your lessons with Eleanor. Martha told me everything." "Martha?" Naomi gasped. Richard nodded. "She came to me yesterday, concerned about what my wife might do if she discovered what's been happening. Martha Heir always looked out for this family's best interests, even when we don't recognize them ourselves." He sighed. "My wife will not be pleased. She has very fixed ideas about the proper order of things. But I am still master of this house, and I say your talent deserves to be nurtured, not silenced." Tears sprang to Naomi's eyes. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll make the most of this opportunity," Richard said. "That's all I ask." "I will, sir. I promise." Richard nodded, satisfied. As for Julian, he hesitated. My son cares for you. More than he should, perhaps. Naomi looked down, unable to deny it. The world is changing, Naomi, but not as quickly as young hearts might wish. There will be challenges ahead for both of you. Richard's voice was kind but realistic. All I ask is that you both proceed with caution and respect for the complexities involved. Yes, sir, Naomi whispered. You may go. And Naomi... Richard smiled slightly. Congratulations on your win. It was well deserved, I'm sure. The night of the Westfield Gala arrived with all the promise of a midsummer dream. The opera house was decorated with flowers and twinkling lights, and the audience was filled with the most prominent citizens of the county. In the front row sat Richard Everly, Julian, and Catherine Wilson. Mrs. Everly had refused to attend, claiming a headache, but her absence was a small price to pay for Richard's unexpected support. Backstage, Naomi adjusted the emerald green gown that Catherine had helped her select. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever worn, with its fitted bodice and flowing skirt. You look stunning, Eleanor said, making a final adjustment to Naomi's hair. Are you nervous? A little, Naomi admitted, but mostly excited. You're going to captivate them, Eleanor assured her, just like you did at the competition. When Naomi's name was announced, she walked onto the stage with confidence. The lights were bright, but this time she wasn't afraid. She found Julian's face in the crowd, drawing strength from his smile. And then she sang. The song was new, something she had written in the weeks since the competition. It spoke of transformation, of finding one's voice after years of silence, of love that transcends boundaries and rules. As the last note hung in the air, the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Flowers were thrown onto the stage. People called for an encore. Naomi looked to Julian, who was applauding with tears in his eyes. Beside him, Richard Everly stood tall and proud, as if she were his own daughter. In that moment, Naomi knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage and with song. She had found her voice. She had been heard. And in the listening, something had changed. Not just for her, but for Julian, for Richard, perhaps even for Everly Manor itself. The song that had once been silenced now soared freely, touching hearts and breaking down the walls that had kept them apart. It was the song that undid him, that undid them all. And in the undoing, something new and beautiful had begun. Beautiful. 6 months later, Naomi stood in the conservatory of Eleanor Wilson's Music School L in Westfield. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows as she guided a young student through vocal exercises. That's it, she encouraged. Let your voice fill the room. The door opened and Julian entered, his face lighting up at the sight of her. Mr. Everly, Naomi said formally, though her eyes danced with private joy. We weren't expecting you until this afternoon. I couldn't wait, Julian replied. I have news. Naomi turned to her student. That's enough for today, Emma. Practice those scales for next time. When they were alone, Julian took Naomi's hands in his. The house is finished, the one on the edge of town near the school. It's ready for us whenever you are. Naomi's heart skipped. Your mother? Still not speaking to me, Julian admitted, but father visits regularly. He's proud of what we're building here. What they were building was a new life. Julian managing part of the Everly, business from Westfield, Naomi teaching at Eleanor's school while continuing her own studies. It wasn't perfect. There were still whispers, still disapproving glances. But they were together, forging a path that neither of them could have imagined a year ago. I have news too, Naomi said, her eyes shining. The Boston Symphony has invited me to audition. Eleanor thinks I'm ready. Julian's face lit up with pride. Of course you're ready. You've always been ready. You just needed the chance to be heard. He pulled her close, no longer caring who might see. Do you remember what I said that first night, when you sang at the party? Naomi nodded, her voice soft with emotion. You said my song was the most honest thing your house had ever heard. And it was, Julian murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Your voice woke something in me that had been sleeping my whole life. It made me brave enough to question everything I'd been taught, everything I thought I knew. Your courage woke mine, Naomi replied. You heard me when no one else was listening. Outside the conservatory windows, autumn leaves danced in the breeze. Inside, two people who had defied the boundaries of their world held each other close, their hearts beating in harmony. The song that had brought them together continued to echo through their lives, a melody of hope, of change, of El Ove that refused to be silenced. And in that song they both had found their truest voice. The end.